Hello, welcome to another one of our videos, and this one's quite a quick one, just looking at a simple exercise that you could use for improving some glute strength, especially through the glute max with hip extension that sort of relates to walking and maybe partly running to some degree as well. The stance leg in this is actually just working equally as hard, so don't ignore what's going on there. But this is quite a useful one for someone who's been having trouble getting some glutes to work, and even hip extensions can bring on some like sacroiliac pain or extension pain. So some of the simplest of exercises are even still troublesome. This is quite a useful exercise for that. All right, so let's have a look at how it works. So basically I've just got like a cable attached to my ankle here, and I could use a TheraBand if I wanted to as well, and just working slowly through a hip extension here. So this is sort of mimicking like a running action on some degree. Now there's several things that are going on. Now the main thing is like trying to keep my hip centered in the socket here. All right, so if I imagine that there's like a socket like that, and there's the head of the femur running through there, I want to basically through the hip flexion, which is where I am at now, and also hip extension, keeping this bit circled, centered in the socket. Right, now I have to make sure that I keep this lumbar curve at all times. It's not a bad thing to let it go into a posterior tilt, but usually when we've got problems with the centering of the hip joint, it's usually moving around way too much. So this is a way to try and control it. So you can see how I'm trying to slowly control that so it doesn't just yank me forward, which usually gives people the pinching at the front, and that's often because of the stiffness here, which is also quite weak. All right, so what I'm doing here is when I'm basically pushed down and then I push back. So if you'll see me run it through a couple of times, as I'm coming into hip flexion, I'm trying to keep it in the center, so I'm not letting it get dragged forward. All right, so that's the first thing. Now when I go to push, I'm going to push down first, and then when I might get to a full extension, I'm going to push back. All right, so it'll be down, and then I get to here, and then it's going to go back. But I've got to make sure that I don't overdo it. If I overdo it, I'm going to get overextension. I'm going to get extension problems in my spine here, because I'm going to exceed its capability for this particular exercise. So you can see there, I have to really control it in this way when it's coming in, so that it doesn't just lose its stability and go posterior tilt too quick, but also when I'm at full extension, that I don't lose control at that point there where I might jam my lower back. All right, so I'm going to need my core to stay engaged right now. If I do those things well, I should start to feel like some glute strength through this area, even a little bit of hamstring, but very much glute strength. Also the other leg, which I mentioned at the start, the stance leg, is quite normal for that to get quite fatigued, because it is quite tiring for the stance leg. Now I can also do this as like a straight leg version if I wanted to. Oh, and the other thing that I mentioned, by the way, the reason I'm standing on the box, I've found that if you did this on the floor gets in the way a little bit, like you can't drag your foot back. It just sort of, you're sort of stuck in a little bit of hip flexion. It doesn't give you that full extension that you would have, because basically when you're running you sort of get a little bit of height to clear the ground, so you're a little bit more free to move. All right, so that's the only reason that I'm on the step there. Now I was going to mention that you can actually do this as a straight leg version. All right, so it's a little bit harder because the lever of the leg, it just feels a bit abnormal too. All right, so you can't really, you're not going to come into this full flexion anymore. You just got the leg working in like a almost not full locked out straight, but just pulling out behind you. I tend to not prefer the other one over this one. Just find this one's a little bit awkward, but it can be useful as a bit of a regression. Probably useful for that last bit there, where the person's trying to control their core so they don't just jam the lower back. All right, so quite good for people with hip problems and low back problems, SI joint problems, where the back extensors are working that too hard. a little bit too excessively and the glutes just not functioning at all. So it's a good regression of other exercises that you could use. But yeah, like I said before, I probably prefer to go to the hip flexion version. And then over time you can start to bring into play other things, and working slowly through your more standing versions, and then eventually it leads into the more dynamic things, and obviously running being one of them. But it can be quite a useful exercise for the person who's really struggling to get anywhere with their hips, and you will need to use some hip mobility work in between this if you've got a lot of trouble at the moment. All right, so anyway, if I thought that'd be a good exercise for those of you out there who are struggling with some of the other things that we traditionally talk about. This is a bit of a step down. If you don't have a cable machine, you can just use a TheraBand. You just attach it to a pole and just sort of have it pulling in that horizontal position there. All right. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed that video. I'll see you on our next one.